And now, here's Mike Muse with the political news.
So let's get right to it and meet the candidates.
That completes the opening statement.
We're going to get right to it.
On Sway in the Morning.
Sway in the Morning, Shay 45. I just threw Tracy a hand signal that confused her. It meant nothing. Mike Muse is here.
Hey, what's up, guys? Good morning. It's always great to talk to you guys, man.
Hey, Mike, I've been out of the country.
Yes, in France, man.
Thank
your
you.
croissants on. Your champagne and your chocolates.
I was eating escargot.
Escargot.
You know, I didn't actually
eating frites, steak and frites.
I didn't actually eat escargot. I just put it on my timeline. Or the duck liver.
You know you did that, man. You know you're a pad thai guy, dude.
No, I found out how they do it. Like, they put the ducks, they trap the ducks in dirt and overfeed them and make their liver inflate and they do horrible stuff to ducks in order to make that stuff called
pad thai.
Yeah, man, it's horrible animal cruelty.
You know, there's policy that was passed here in New York City and in some restaurants in some cities to ban having pad thai being served in your restaurant as a result of that.
Yeah, look it up, man. If you eat that stuff, if you don't care, enjoy it. I don't know. I couldn't. The snails. You know, no offense to anybody. I stepped on snails as a kid.
Yeah, so you feel bad about it.
I feel bad about eating them now as an adult.
Yeah, you care about the animals, bro. That's what's up.
Me, my daughter.
You care about ducks' livers?
I do.
You care about snails?
I do.
You do caviar, Sway?
Fish eggs. I did it once a couple years ago, and it did taste. Well, it was tasty.
Yeah.
Caviar.
Pants.
Yeah. I'm fancy.
Some nice vodka.
You know all of this stuff. Well, any of this stuff that comes in the country, like the caviar and the food that's being imported in from other places, will this be affected by the recent news of all these tax increases that are going to be put on imports?
Funny you should say that. We talked about caviar and great parents of caviar is vodka. Who said Russia? But also, too, bourbon. Bourbon is actually now going to be affected in terms of the UK and the European Union. They have announced that they're ready to go into a trade war with the United States if the United States chooses to raise its tariffs with 25% on steel and 10% on aluminum. And so what they did said they will raise their prices in terms of bourbon that is made in Kentucky if they choose to do it. And Sway, we've been talking about tariffs on Monday, and the citizens, we had a great conversation. Amazing phone calls came in. I want to shout out to all the citizens, Sway, who hit me up on my timeline and DM me on Instagram. And really, Sway, the people who hit me the most were construction workers. Construction workers.
Infrastructure builders.
That's who actually hit me up the most, actually, and was saying that across the country in different states, blue states and red states, and particularly in Florida too as well, they all said that their jobs are talking about this. And if this hits their industry, they're expected to lose thousands of jobs just within their own states as a result of the higher price of that. Because citizens, we talked about on Monday, aluminum and steel is almost in not every product that we do, but in terms of infrastructure, Sway, what you talked about, in terms of the cars that we drive, the homes that we live in, the office buildings that get built, it has some aluminum and steel associated with it. If you guys enjoy soup cans, right, that's going to increase. Campbell Soup came out with a statement and said they will have to raise their prices if this goes into legislation. Sway, we talked about chocolates over there in France. We all know we love Hershey's chocolate bars here in the United States. It's made in Pennsylvania, a very important, battleground state for the 2020 election cycle. They said that they will have to raise their prices too as well because aluminum, their chocolate is wrapped in that aluminum, that tin aluminum foil vibe. So then we also had a caller from Texas and said the same thing, that she, their industry is Reynolds Wraps formerly, and there's had issues with that. But Sway, as a result of all that came out, there was some breaking news that came out yesterday late afternoon from the White House that the National Economic Advisor, Gary Cohen, has decided to resign. And Gary Cohen's resignation, he sounded alarm bells in establishment circles from Washington and Wall Street. Gary Coleman, Sway, is the former president of Goldman Sachs, a big investment banking firm in the world that's based here in the United States. Controversial as it may be in some regards, depending upon your position where you stand on economics. But he has resigned, Sway, and he said that the tariffs, the indication is it was due to the tariffs. He has been fighting this legislation for over a year, where President Trump, even a candidate Trump, wanted to raise these particular tariffs as well. He's been fighting it for over a year to get the president not to be able to respond to it, and this is what he did. By him leaving, Sway, is an indication of what we've seen everyone else leave the White House. And here is what President Trump had to say in regards to that at a news conference yesterday.
Everybody wants to work in the White House. They all want a piece of that Oval Office. They want a piece of the West Wing. But they all want to be in the White House. So many people want to come in. I have a choice of anybody. I could take any position in the White House. and I'll have a choice of the 10 top people having to do with that position. Everybody wants to be there.
This sounds like he's talking about ass. Play that back again. Let's say that again. Watch this.
Everybody wants to work in the White House. They all want a piece of that Oval Office. They want a piece of the West Wing.
Want a piece of that ass. All right, we got Daniel on the line from South Florida. Daniel, what up, man?
Hey, what's up? I love you guys. I love listening to you guys. Listen to you guys for the past 5 years in the morning.
Wow.
Awesome.
That's what's up, Daniel. Hey, man, we came up in the game together. I appreciate you, man. You're a citizen, as you already.
In the morning.
Yeah, man. What's your thoughts on all these tariffs?
Yeah, like Mike Muse said, I heard that we're going to do 25% more on the steel and the aluminum and all that. But I was thinking, what does Mike Muse think? Like, is it possible for China to, maybe put tax on us since we import a lot of things from them? Like, we're entering kind of like a murky territory if we start taxing Canada. I mean, they're our next door neighbors. What's going to stop another country from, raising taxes for us and screwing us over?
Daniel, stick with me right there for one quick second because I'm going to talk about you are leading me into the point that I was going to make in terms of the instability of this proposed, and I want to make sure I say that correct, proposed legislation that the President Trump did in a knee-jerk reaction.
It's a proposed, but it hasn't gone.
It hasn't happened, but it looks like it's more likely to happen than not to happen. There was no indications to the State Department, the Treasury Department, or the Department of Defense that this was going to happen. There was no prepared remarks. There was no diplomatic strategy. There was no communication plan. Congress wasn't even notified regarding to that. The reason why that's important now is because what we saw yesterday come out was Steve Mnuchin, who's a Treasury Secretary, said that now actually Canada and Mexico may be exempt from this, where President Trump said in the briefing on Monday that this was across the board in general. The issue that I brought up on Monday was that China is the main contributors of the dumping of aluminum and steel here in America, and they're the ones that we should be going after. But instead, by the President Trump proposing overall, including Canada, including Mexico, including the UK, including the European Union, this has now raised instability within our allies and our partners.
Yeah.
So Steve Mnuchin said that Canada and Mexico won't be affected by that, but that's his opinion on it, where President Trump is saying everyone's included in it. So Daniel, that leads me to your point, because actually Canada is our number one consumer supplier of both steel and aluminum, and Mexico is number 4 supplier of steel and number 7 for aluminum. So we could go into a big trade war, because on Monday President Trump is saying Canada is included in this, but on last night Steve Mnuchin was saying that Canada isn't included. So we just don't know, Daniel, where we are with that.
Hey Danny, man, if I could call you Danny, right?
Yeah, that's fine.
Okay, man. Man, I appreciate your question. Have a good day, okay? We're going to go to Canada. Sadie from Toronto is on the line. Good morning. Is it Sadie or Sadie?
It's Sadie. It's Sadie.
Sadie. Good morning, Sadie. What are your thoughts?
Good morning, Sway. In the morning.
Hey. What are your thoughts on this, man? Mike just brought up Canada.
Yeah, man. I gotta tell you, man. I haven't been happier to be Canadian in a very long time. It's definitely, you guys got some crazy stuff going on over there, but I feel like we will be affected by all this change because I'm hearing people, that are very, very worried about what's happening in the States because us being so close to the States and neighboring to the States and everything's just so unpredictable right now, like Trump can make one wrong move and it's on, right? So it's like we're just too close for comfort right now. But I feel like we'll be affected by these changes for sure.
Okay.
So, rightfully, Saudi,
yeah.
You are correct, but again, we just don't know where we are going to go with that. So, either way, if we do go into a trade war, this isn't good for any consumer good. The idea of this trade, Sway, on its surface is the idea to increase jobs and production here within the United States, right? We believe our jobs are going away. But as we talk about often, Sway, is that the manufacturing is trade isn't the issue. What the issue is automation of jobs. What's that issue is the technology. The issue is that technology is now swapping forces with the workforce. So now computers are running our manufacturing plant. So it's not that we have an issue with the production, it's that we have the issue with the people. We don't need as many people anymore, unfortunately, to run these machines. And so the answer is, what is our government doing to prepare those individuals for jobs in other industries such as alternative energy, which China is already leading the race. It's predicted Sway, by 2050, China will be the leader in alternative energy and alternative energy sources. And so where are we within that race? But in particular, I want to make sure I bring in another Republican into this conversation, Speaker of the House Paul Ryan. And here's what he had to say yesterday regarding this tariff legislation that the president proposed on Monday.
Let me say it this way. There is clearly abuse occurring. Clearly, there is overcapacity, dumping, and transshipping of steel and aluminum by some countries, particularly China. But I think the smarter way to go is to make it more surgical and more targeted. So I think 232 is a little too broad, and I think it's more prone to retaliation. And so what we're encouraging the administration to do is to focus on what is clearly a legitimate problem and to be more surgical in its approach so that we can go after the true abusers without creating any kind of unintended consequences or collateral damage.
So, Sway, Speaker Paul Ryan is speaking to what Canada, the callers from Canada are calling and saying, they will be affected by the unintended consequences regarding that. He's saying, let's focus on what I was saying earlier. Let's focus on the true abuser, which is China, and be more surgical. Surgical meaning, let's just focus on that one country and not do the broad stroke of everything. But Sway, here's why he really said that. You want to know the reason why he said that? The European Union leader, the European Union came out and he said that if this these tariffs go into place, they're going to make sure tariffs or products coming into Europe will be taxed at a higher rate to the point where the Europeans and those who live in Britain will not be able to purchase it. Those will be affected in particular are Harley Davidson. Why is that important, Sway? Harley Davidson headquarters in Wisconsin. Who is in Wisconsin? Speaker of the House Paul Ryan. They also said that bourbon will be taxed at a higher rate coming into the UK, into the European Union. Sway, where is bourbon made? Kentucky. Who is in charge of Kentucky? The Senate leader, Mitch McConnell. They went on further to sway that jeans, Levi jeans in particular, will be increased at a higher tariffs. Why is that important, Sway? Levi jeans is headquartered in where? San Francisco in the Bay Area. That's California. And that is Minority Leader Nancy Pelosi.
We got Brandon from the Bay Area on the line.
What up,
Brandon? How you doing, bro?
Brandon.
Good. I'm actually from Arkansas, but I'm living in Fremont now.
Hey, man. Yeah, I'm from Oakland. Where you live off of? Maury, Stevenson? What boulevard you live off of?
Maury, close to Mission.
By the mall.
Pretty close.
Yeah, man. My man Brandon, he's a Bay Area light now.
What up, Brandon?
Yeah. What are your thoughts on this? What are your thoughts, Brandon?
Look, I wanted to add on the alternative energy thing just right quick. China's going to lead in alternative energy, but they're also leading the world in building coal-fired power plants. So that you got to put out all the info there.
Sure.
But on the tariffs, right? The idea on the tariffs, Trump's he goes a little wild, he gets a little broad, but the idea is that we're already being unfairly taxed by a lot of these places. We need to make the playing field a little more even, not attack, but make it more even so that we can create jobs here. And there is the technology part of jobs, but the big thing is EPA regulation is what killed our steel industry, right? The other countries don't follow our EPA regulations. So we got to get a balance there. That's all I want to say, really, is just we got to have a balance.
What are your thoughts on that, Mike Muse?
Yeah, I'm going to Brandon, thank you for your call. I'm actually writing some notes down just so I can go in chronological order what you said. Yes, China is leading in terms of alternative energy in 2050. In terms of that, they're playing both sides of the coin by also engaging in coal. Where are they engaging at coal, Brandon and Sway? In Africa. Why is that important? Because China now is taking the lead in where America used to be in terms of global economics, global business, global commerce, and global engagement. Now China goes almost to any country in the world to create business revenue, which goes back to where? Their bottom line, their pockets, their coffers. Also, too, China is almost inviting leaders of different countries almost every week to come to China for literally a week, and they entertain them. They do what the United States used to do in terms of these state visits,
yes,
right? And all in a way to get business to be allocated there. So they are taking the lead now and engaging in this engagement in terms of business, economics, and commerce. The next thing, when it comes down to tariffs and the import, there is a trade deficit that we are facing. So both Republicans and Democrats have talked about it, but it's a matter of how do you go about doing it, right? In terms of making the playing field for the deficits a lot better. That's why I was saying that this is a knee-jerk reaction to it, because the State Department wasn't notified of their allies, and Rex Tillerson, who's Secretary of State, he came out with a statement yesterday, Sway, what was reported from the Washington Post, that Secretary Tillerson has said that this is affecting our national security now as a result of that, because our allies are frustrated with us. There was no economic strategy in terms of how it affected to us and what is going to be the long-term play in terms of how that balances out the trade deficit. By you going into doing these terrors that infuriates our allies, a trade war does happen no matter what. The next part, though, is the steel in terms of the EPA regulations. And when it comes to that, we can discuss regulations on both sides and how it affects it. But the bottom line of it, though, Sway, is that the technology has impacted the steel industry. Steel is still being made and steel is still being produced, but it's who is doing the producing of the steel. And it's more technology versus less of a workforce that is happening with that. And so it goes to, Sway, and this is almost like a case study, if you will, right? And as we come to a close, citizens, as you begin to think about 2018, as you begin to think about the midterm elections that are coming up in your local and your state level, you have to ask now your politicians, Republicans and Democrats. And there's Democrats who are saying this statement that we're going to bring jobs back here in these cities. Really start to challenge them at these town halls. Really start to tweet them and say, how are we going to bring back our jobs? How many jobs are actually coming back to this abandoned manufacturing site? Back in the day, it was maybe 10,000, but now maybe only 1,000 are coming back. What are you going to do with the other net 9,000 job losses? How are you going to retrain that workforce, and what new industries are you bringing in?
So Brandon does make a good point. It's just about, in terms of the trade deficit, it's just about the approach that we're taking right now.
It's the approach and the context that and how it's given. So you must be able to get the context of it in terms of China being now the global leader on economics now in terms, I don't want to say economics, in terms of doing business globally, right? And that's the context of that. And then we have to put in the context technology, but also the context that Democrats, depending upon which city and state that they're in, also say the same thing, Sway, which I believe does a disservice to our country, right? Because what it does is it gives a false sense of hope that these jobs are coming back in full force in the 10,000. And Sway, just insert personal story. As you know, Sway, I'm an industrial engineer. I used to work for GM. My family worked for General Motors. I come from a blue state. I come from the Union states. And with GM, Sway, back in the 90s, high school kids used to opt out of going to college to go into working in these manufacturing plants, Sway, because of the fact that jobs were so plenty and you can get into the upper middle class by doing that. Those jobs are no longer available at that rate anymore. Are they making cars? Absolutely. But Sway, back when I was in college, I was working on lean manufacturing, which Toyota takes the lead on, and we were developing strategies to decrease human capital, right, in order to improve efficiencies, to increase corporations' bottom line. And so we have to have an honest conversation with that about that, no matter if Republican or Democrat. At the end of it is, what is the real story and how are our politicians preparing the new workforce, either vocationally or by alternative energy?
Brandon, thanks for your call. We got Davin in Chicago, Dave from Fresno, Sid from Toronto, Free from D.C., Alvoid from D.C., Lee from Jersey, Pete from Chicago. Hit up Mike Muse directly. We're going to keep up this conversation. And it's scary when you got Flippy the robot now starting to come into McDonald's and flip hamburgers. If you can't get a job at McDonald's now.
Bro, that's a great example, Sway. That's technology.
Flippy the robot, Heather.
McDonald's starting to use real beef. And they got vegan burgers,
if you request it.
If you request
it, they cook it with
fresh
GMO beef.
So that's a great example of what technology is doing on our everyday industries and how it's impacting us. And now we have to have a serious conversation with our political Republican and Democrats. Citizens, hit me up, keep the conversation going at I am Mike Muse, M-U-S-E on Twitter and Instagram. And I'm watching the stock markets today to see how they're going to respond to Gary Cohen's resignation. They're saying, Sway, that the stock market is going to be at some lows today as a result
in
of
the
that.
midterms as well.
Yes, in the midterms.
Okay. Heather.
Sway.
We got sports up next.
I have an update on the bag of Mr. Jamel Charlo.